Well, it's about 3 or 4 days later, and I have the main harness about 80% complete. I have all new ends on it, as you can see here. This is the headlight shell end in my left hand, working around to the pigtail that goes to the taillight. I took a lot of time on this. I didn't keep track of the hours, but again, it's been 3 or 4 partial days. I've done other things in between. I used 3 different harnesses to make this finished item. The 2 well-used harnesses that I talked about in the first part of this video, and I used bits and pieces from the original harness, what little I had to work with, and started at this end and worked my way around. I did a lot of splicing and fitting of different pieces. For instance, you can see right here, that's a splice. I had removed the end. It was not in very good condition, so I clipped it back and spliced in a piece of better wire and then put a new end on it. That's that green wire I'm talking about right there. And there's another splice right there. And there are splices throughout the harness. There's one there. Most of them are probably hidden by the black electrical tape, but rest assured there are a number of splices in here. One thing that I did do as I was working my way along the harness is I used my meter to check for continuity to make sure that I did not have any broken lines, and that as I was splicing and putting on ends, I checked, double checked. Each one of these wires has been probably checked 4 times by now to make sure that there's complete continuity all the way through the system. And it will be done again before it's all over. The black tape is simply to hold everything in place in its relative position until I can use the gray tape. That would be this tape right here. And I will then be rewrapping the entire loom along with that PVC sleeving, which will come up to this end here and goes to about here. And then from there on, it is the gray silver electrical type tape that will be used to pull everything together one last time. But it's in relative position of how it's going to be on the bike. And the next step then, of course, will be to finish up with the gray silver tape, and then I think we're going to have a finished main wiring harness or loom. Well, it's an hour and a half later, and we've got the harness complete, as you can see, all wrapped. And it's been tested with my multimeter multiple times, so I'm confident that all the connections are solid and this is ready to go on the bike. I just now have to figure out how it goes on the bike because there wasn't one on the bike when I started. So we'll sort that out at another time. A couple of things I wanted to talk about. When I wrap a harness such as this, I start with the pigtail. So when I say pigtail, I mean this extension that comes off. Like you see here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. When I start with the pigtail, the reason I start with the pigtails is I start wrapping on the outer edge where my thumb is, and I make a couple of wraps, and then I wrap down along the pigtail till I reach the stem, and then I'll make a couple of wraps there and then terminate that wrap. I do that with all the pigtails, and then I come back and I complete the main wrap of the main harness. And the reason you do that is you don't want to end up with a bunch of loose ends here, here, and here at each of the pigtails. If you wrap this way, you will end up with a loose end at the end of each of the pigtails that could unravel in the future. So by starting a couple of wraps around itself and going this way, you will capture the loose end here when you wrap the main harness. Then what I typically will do, it depends on how the harness is laid out, but in this case I started, after I put on this new PVC sleeve, as you see here, this is the headlight shell end in my left hand. Again, a couple of wraps to get started, then I work my way around this way, terminating at the opposite end, which is where the taillight pigtail is. I come down, make a couple of wraps, and work backwards, and then terminate and clip it off and end up with the last wrap here. By doing it this way, you only end up with one potential loose end in this entire harness, and that would be, in this case, right here. Just a little tip for you if you ever wrap a harness. At least that's what seems to have worked for me for all these years. A couple other comments. In the headlight shell, there were two, right here, two four-way connectors. That's what this green and this black wire are for. When I say four-way connectors, I mean they look like this. You can see where the wire comes in here, and then there's four spades or female connections to go out to other parts of the harness in the headlight shell. I have never been able to find four-way connectors like these in aftermarket kits. And so you have to come up with a solution. What I do, and I've run into this once or twice before on other projects, I just use a three-way connector like you can see there, and then I make a little jumper that plugs into the one of the three ways, which leaves then two open here, and now I have the other two at the other opposite end of the jumper, so that I have, excuse me, I have all four available to me. Now whether all four of them are used in this bike right off the top, I don't know without looking at the wiring diagram, but that's the easiest way I found to duplicate that four-way connector. Let's see, what else do we want? Here's the leftover pieces. Again, this harness is a combination of three different harnesses. The two sacrificial harnesses, one from an SL100, one from an SL125, and then what little I had from the original that came with the bike. But this is what's left over, you can see here. I will sort through this. Much of this is going to get thrown away. All the connectors, these used connectors, and the spade terminals that have been cut off and replaced, such as these, those are all going to get thrown away. Some of the wiring I can probably preserve. This piece of yellow could probably be preserved. It's just got some adhesive on it from electrical tape. And as long as the color of the wiring is preserved, some of these are faded pretty bad because they're like this one, for instance, this pink. I'll save that. I'll sort it out, throw away what I don't want, and then the rest will go into my reserve bag that I use when I'm repairing harnesses such as this one, if I ever need them. Obviously, I replaced the connectors with new, as you can see there. I did the same thing on the stator assembly. In fact, let's talk about the stator just for a moment. I did re-sleeve this with PVC, as you can see, new black PVC that did have black originally, and replace the connector on the end, and that will line up or match up with this particular connector right here. See, I think it'll go like that when it's installed on the bike. And then I had to cut a little slit here for the neutral wire to come out, as you can see right there. And I just clipped off the end here and re-tinned the wire. I think you can see on the end. So I have a fresh connection that will go into the neutral switch on the engine cases. The end of this wire, or this sleeve rather, right here, originally was heat sealed or crimped, I should say, like you can see there. This happens to be the stator. We'll come back to that in a minute. I have never been successful in trying to duplicate that look. I've tried different techniques over the years, and it just never seemed to work out for me. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to leave that open. And it was open originally at the opposite end anyway here. So I'm just going to leave it open. That black sleeve can't move very far anyway because of the exit hole I had to cut right here for the neutral wire to come out. So it really can't go anywhere. If you're concerned about that, what you could do, I suppose, though I've never done this, is fill the end here with RTV silicone, and down in here maybe 1/4 of an inch or so, 4 or 5 millimeters, and just clamp it like that overnight and let the RTV set and it seal off the end. I don't think it's necessary. I think it'd make a mess could probably be done, but I'm not going to bother with that. We didn't talk about two other things originally, and that was the ignition coil and the rectifier. This bike did not have an ignition coil on it when I picked it up, and there's all kinds of options out there for ignition coils. It's no longer available from Honda, but you can find NOS, you can find aftermarket. Many of them are Asian made, of course, and so sourcing a coil, ignition coil, will not be a concern. Or a condenser. It didn't have the condenser either. I'll deal with that later. Let's talk about the rectifier. This is the original rectifier. Again, we didn't talk about this originally. I did pull the plug off the end that would connect here. The opposite end of this would connect here. So that I could test it. And there is a testing protocol and the service manuals for testing of this item. And it's pretty easy to test. I won't talk you through all of that here, but the takeaway is that I'm getting very inconsistent results on the tests from this rectifier. Not surprising, looking at the condition of it. Again, there are many options out there. There are all kinds of solutions. Those that use modern technology and a little tiny wafer to replace this rectifier to solutions that look very much like this. In fact, there are many used and aftermarket versions of this out on eBay all over the place. I will attempt to replace this with something that looks reasonably original like this. I will likely not buy a used unit because you never know what you're getting when you buy a used unit off of eBay, whether it tests good or not. And since there are so many solutions available, I don't think I have to go used. They're not expensive and readily available, like ignition coil. So I will get a new rectifier and a new ignition coil and capacitor eventually here along the way. In the meantime, the wiring harness or loom is complete, and these parts are just going to be set aside for now. Well, I might install the stator assembly on the bike. May or may not. I might wait until I have the engine installed on the machine or on the frame. You can see there, by the way, I've cleaned that up a bit, I think. See what that looks like. Certainly the harness or loom itself is not going to be installed until much later. I do have a little more cleanup to do here. The battery connection, it's a little dirty yet. By the way, the green sleeving right here is original. That came off one of those sacrificial harnesses I bought, as well as the red portion here with the fuse block. That's all original. One of the green sleeves right here has a little crack in it, but there's nothing I can do about that. I have never been able to really find green sleeving that looks quite like this in this size. So I'm not even going to worry about it. I've cleaned it up. I've cleaned the connections up pretty well. I think you can see there. Those are the grounds or the earth. And again, everything's been tested very thoroughly. Probably half a dozen times by now, or maybe even more for each wire. So that's going to be it, I think, for this video today, folks. That is, again, reconditioning and creating a good wiring harness or loom for the SL125. I know I didn't go through a lot of the detail on how I went and did the work, but if you're interested in that, go check out one of my playlists on my YouTube channel, which has a lot more detail on the techniques that I used to do this, and particularly as it relates to the Yamaha YL1. I did a lot of video work and posted quite a bit of content on how to restore a wire harness or loom like this. So I didn't shoot that again because I viewed it to be redundant, and go check that out if you're interested. We're going to call it quits here. Any issues, questions, thoughts? Drop me a note, and as usual, thanks for watching.